So I think a good example might be in my first area in Fontana. Our area was, we call it the shoebox, and it was only really, I mean, like maybe a square mile. It was not a big area because there's so many people living in it. I think in the areas I served in, there were so many people. The Inland Empire, I think, is so heavily populated that the areas that you served in are so small because there's so many people living there. I mean, to contact everyone in this one small area, you could never do it in a transfer or how many transfers because there's so many people. I feel like the Hispanic population that I worked with, most of them worked rural jobs. A lot of them had been in the States for maybe 5 to 10 years or so. Their English was developing, where they would want opportunities to speak English with us sometimes. But most of them worked either construction or worked, in some kind of rural agricultural venture. Some would own like a shop or something like that. They'd own like a printer shop or a bicycle shop or a repair mechanic shop of some kind. There are a lot of blue-collar workers that were there. There were some that were educated. There were a lot of the children who, second generation who'd been there for a while, who were educated, who were able to speak English and Spanish and, would go to college and things like that and had more, had jobs that required more education than the parents did. It was really that where I served was one really big city. It wasn't not a lot of not big city skyscraper kind of thing, but just urban. It really was like a big urban city, a giant urban city, and I think for them, I saw a lot of families struggle. I think a lot of families down there didn't abide by gospel principles. There was a lot of drugs and alcohol and family issues that were there. And you saw a lot of that in your mission. You saw a lot of families that struggle with these issues. And you start teaching a family and either the husband wasn't very supportive or the kids were rampant, didn't have very disciplined kids, didn't have very disciplined children. And that was hard, to have these families that the gospel, simple things like family prayer or scripture study or attending a church or attending church could provide this family with so much more, with meaningful experiences to bring them together. And so I think I saw a lot of good examples of bad examples as far as families go. There's a lot of divorce and a lot of kids growing up in an environment and in a system that kind of perpetuates itself, where these kids didn't have very high ambitions because they just didn't have any good examples to look to. So I saw a lot of that. At the same time, there was a lot of instances where families were working, where good family environments, you see these kids as blossom and be able to recognize the dysfunction that they would see with their friends' families or whatnot, but then understand that the gospel is what really brings them together. We had La Familia Luna, where the dad was in the bishopric and the mother was working part-time from home. And they had like 4 or 5 kids. And their kids consistently, each one of them were very strong in the church, had strong testimonies, and were anxious to serve missions and anxious to contribute, to the church. And I think the difference that I saw with La Familia Luna was their dedication to the gospel and the strong testimony of the parents. That made a big difference for them, was that their parents were both very active and both brought the gospel home and really lived the gospel at home. That made a big difference for them. The city of San Bernardino, was the kind of the biggest city. It was also the poorest city, where we had a lot of crime down there, and a lot of poverty as well in San Bernardino. I'm trying to think of what else. We had most of it was, again, a lot of urban, a lot of people just lived there, and a lot of just small businesses and stuff like that. Nothing really of note was there. And geographically, people would always ask me, "Oh, were you able to go to Disneyland?" No, I wasn't able to go to Disneyland. It wasn't in the mission boundaries, but we had a lot of Caucasian people down there speaking English. We had a large Spanish population. Then we had a large Polynesian population. those are kind of the three categories of people that live down there. We also had a lot of immigrants. I mean, Southern California, we had a lot of Asian people that came down there, or a lot of Filipino people that had immigrated to California, and they occupied a lot of the other, like the blue collar, like, you know, more urban or more rural jobs that were open down there. So a pretty diverse cultural environment down there, where we had English-speaking people, and then we people speaking Spanish and Samoan and Tongue and Vietnamese and Tagalog. You know, speaking different languages from where they've come from, and so it was very diverse. Being a Spanish-speaking missionary, I felt I was able to speak to 90% of the people that I'd ever talked to. Able to contact people on the street speaking English and contact people speaking Spanish. I felt special as a Spanish missionary because I was able to talk to most everybody. I think it was about a year ago we had that shooting in San Bernardino. We had I think it was a husband and wife combination who were radical Islamic, you know, affiliates, and we're actually, you know, where the shooting took place actually took place in one of my areas there in San Bernardino. I was talking to when the news broke. I talked to some of my former companions saying, "Hey, we served there. Like we know where E Street is. You know, we know where that is." And that was. It felt almost like a family member had been in an accident. You know, I was very concerned about what happened to these people in this area that I served in. So yeah, the San Bernardino shooting took place in one of my former areas, and it was heartbreaking to know how that would have impacted the members there, and how that would have impacted the community there that I'd grown to love so much. So the weather there was beautiful. We had, in the summer, you know, it was hot. It'd be in the 90s, you know, consistently. And in the wintertime, it would rain. We had a lot of rain, almost like monsoon type rains, where it'd rain an awful lot in a couple days. Transportation there was a lot of, people took a lot of buses. In my area, we were designated a bicycle area or a car area, so we had either one. Bike area is my favorite because we would go out and we'd be able to street contact on the way to appointments, on the way back from appointments, everywhere. We were able to stop people on our bikes and share the gospel. So in a car, it's much more focused. I think it's harder to OYM, open your mouth, to do street contacting. But most of my areas were on a bike. I think most people down there. There was a fairly substantial bus system where we had buses that would transport a lot of the workers to or from, you know, wherever they were working. And most people had their own private vehicle that they would use. But as missionaries, we kind of stuck out because there weren't a whole lot of people on bicycles except for the Mormon missionaries. We were easily identifiable. I think it's a little more expensive because it's California. Obviously, not only are wages increased, but so is cost of living. I think most of these rural people, most of the Hispanic people that I live with, often found very humble accommodations just because that's just how much they earned. But I mean, I think the cost of living there, I think, was a little more than it would be here in Utah. It was very, urban developed. There weren't a whole lot of parks. There weren't a whole lot of like natural, like countryside areas. A lot of it was developed. It's just developed inland empire. It's one giant city. In a way, it kind of felt like LA, where it's this massive city where people live. And that's where we were sharing the gospel.